doesn't matter what kind of mistakes we make or don't make, or make blunders, times, dates, places, don't even matter. My name is Bernard Sweeney. I'm an Irish traveller, and this is a podcast through TravVision in the premises of Rural Red. I'm joined with fellow traveller Patrick Nevin. Patrick is with a traveller organisation. I'll let Patrick introduce himself, what he does, who he hates most, and who he'd like to punch. Go for it, Patrick.
Thanks, Bernard, for that introduction. I don't really hate anyone, and I'm not all that interested in punching anyone either. So, look, my name is Patrick Nevin. I'm the manager of Untitled Chapter's Community Development Project. Untitled Travellers is a small traveller community development organisation. It's been based out here in Tala it was founded in 1999, so 22 years ago. It's a small community development organisation. There's myself. We have a community development worker part-time. We have an admin worker part-time. We have a men's health worker. And then we have within that the primary healthcare project, which we have 6 community health workers who work on a part-time basis in the community. We link in with a population of roughly 1,200 individuals. There is 13 official halting sites with some group housing schemes, and also the larger traveller community then living within the standard accommodation spread out over the Tala area of South County Dublin.
You have an organisation that caters for around 1,200 people.
Individuals.
And I just heard you saying at least 3 part-time positions.
Absolutely, yes.
How the hell do you manage?
Well, that's a good question, Bernie. We
struggle by the sounds of it.
We do. It is a struggle. I mean, it is a human rights organisation. It's an advocate organisation. We would deal with a huge amount of issues around accommodation or lack of accommodation. Then if you combine the lack of accommodation then with the issues around health, mental health, physical health, mass unemployment, educational issues within the community, anti-traveller racism, anti-traveller bias. Yeah, it is a struggle at the best of times.
How, these things are popping into my head. We used to make it, because, I know, I'm familiar with the organisations, and if anyone's listening, as I mentioned, Patrick is a traveller, I'm a traveller myself. We come from a small indigenous minority community. When you say indigenous, what I mean is our culture is indigenous to the land, to the places we came from. It's slightly different from the current settled population culture, which is a construct of English culture in many ways. It's not against the English, not against anyone. But we're from this minority. We have some of the worst health statistics both in Ireland and Europe. A life expectancy of around 65. 11%, this is some of the reports I've been reading, 11% of deaths are by suicide. So there's a chronic mental health issue within the community. Yeah. You've got a small organisation, a human rights organisation, but it sounds like underfunded if people are part-time and catering for 1,200 people. Yeah, I asked you a minute ago, how do you cope? But what are you meant to do with that?
Yes, and I mean that's a very valid question, and it's an extremely important question. How do we deal with it? We do, I would say, as best as one can. And I mean, if you just look in terms of, you talked about certain reports there, reports on mental health, reports on accommodation, reports on employment or lack of. I mean, there's a plethora of reports going right back to the 1980s that highlights all of the issues, all of the consequences, I would argue, of a process of assimilation and absorption and othering that began as early as 1921.
What's the othering? Just explain to people that might be...
Othering?
Yeah.
Well, the othering process is the process of, I suppose, excluding those that are not deemed as valued, are not part of the norm, or not part of the dominant society. And if you take travellers in terms of the formation of the Irish state, I would argue that we were the first others. So that othering, that literally, I mean, there's writers that have spoken about this in Edward Said and others like that, colonial, who have written huge works on...
Big fan of Edward Said.
Yeah. And they would, they have done it, their research and their philosophical discourses and conversations. And we fit that hallmark. We fit that process. So the state, I would argue, from as early as
Say if
1920.
someone was looking for an example, you're talking about the othering would be what? The stripping of somebody's civil liberties, their human
Well,
rights.
it's not just the stripping. It's actually the stripping is one thing. If you have them in the first place, you're removing them after the fact. But in the context of travellers, I would argue that we never had those. We were never part of the social contract.
I got you.
We were never included in that social contract once the Free State came about. And there's references in the Urban District Council archives and records all down the West Coast, all through the Midlands, that within the first weeks and months of the formation of the Irish Free State, there was lobbying at a local council, local authority level by business owners, the publicans, the shopkeepers, the various different great and good of Irish society, settled society or sedentary society, calling on the local authorities, who then were requested a call on central government at the time to initiate a policy of removal of these gypsy tinkers. And they used the term gypsy quite a lot in the early discourse when it came to travellers, to remove them from society, from the localities where they had resided. Now remember, if you look at that and you ask that question, these families, these traveller families, tinker families, whatever terminology you want to use, had coexisted with the majority settled sedentary population pre-1921. When in a short period of time after the formation of the Irish state, this new state that had just grown, had just been given its freedom to engage, to run its own course, to direct its own vision of what the new Ireland was going to be about. They started to target travellers in Galway, in Mayo, in Sligo, Donegal, Clare, Limerick, Kerry, West Cork, and right around the country. And within a 2.5 year period, from 1922 to 1925, the central government had put in place a piece of legislation which was called the Local Government Act 1925, which gave these local authorities the carte blanche powers to evict these said encampments along in essentially anywhere in the new state, in the new free state of the 26 counties. So within 2.5 years of the state being formed, a piece of legislation which I would call an ethnic or ethno-profiling legislation was put in place. So when I say othering and when I say travellers in the context of the Irish state are the first others, I literally mean that within 2.5 years of the formation of the Irish Free State, they had put together a piece of legislation that was the first of many to come.
Fascinating, yeah.
But they initiated it instantaneous. And remember, if I'm correct, the date for the formation of the Irish Free State was the 6th of December 1921. We're coming up to its 100th anniversary next year, 2022. In the first weeks, and I think it was the first 4 months of the Irish Free State, there was no shots fired in the Irish Civil War, Republicans versus the new Free Staters. So in those 4 months, 3 to 4 months of the formation of the Irish Free State, you will find a lot of commentary, a lot of discourse and conversation, particularly, as I said, in the Urban District Council archives and so forth, about tinker gypsy travellers and the new official Ireland at that point.
Yeah.
Calling for the removal from these encampments. What's interesting as well, that piece of legislation was being reviewed in 1942, which was roughly nearly 20 years later. And when it was being reviewed in the Dáil, the then minister at the time, Dillon, I can't think of his first name at the moment, it'll come to me. He acknowledged in the Dáil records that while the legislation that was written up, that Local Government Act in 1925, was written up, while it doesn't specifically name anyone in particular, he did acknowledge that it was designed particularly for those that reside on the margins of the roadside in these temporary dwellings of tents, wagons.
So he referred to the almost the cultural lifestyle and the location without mentioning the names.
Without mentioning the people as a...
But it's obvious to anyone that would know.
And it's important, Bernie, just to understand that in the context of that point in 1942. If you think about it, that piece of legislation that was created in 1925 or introduced in 1925, Nazi Germany didn't come about until 1933, essentially. Yeah. And a piece of legislation that was ethnic profiling. It was profiling of people for their cultural differences and their cultural identity. It was 9 years ahead.
They were conscious of it.
Yeah. They were 9 years ahead of what was to come.
Interesting.
It foreshadowed, I would argue, and others would say, that it foreshadowed that type of ethnic profiling that was to take place then.
If you want to jump a bit forward, we'll go back to 1922 again because I have something interesting to say on that. If you go to the 1963 document, they use very similar language again that you would find in Germany.
Absolutely.
So long before Hitler came along, they were thinking, talking, speaking of these ethnic identifiers and get these people away.
Yeah.
Now let's go back to the 1920s for a second, right? Because I was always puzzled. As travellers, we're operating at a different frequency. We know ourselves when we see ourselves without even meeting each other. We can recognise each other. We can speak to each other. We have a code of conduct, even if we've never spoken about it. There's things you do and you don't do when you're a traveller.
Yeah.
And we always had that frequency. And then we grew up told that you're uneducated, you're wayward, you're backward, you need this and you need that, we'll help you, we'll save you, and all that kind of stuff. But you get a bit older and you're thinking there's something not right here. There's something a bit off here. Because, excuse my language, you'd meet fucking idiots that were they were no more intelligent than a rock. But these people, for some bizarre reason, had power over you, dictating to you, telling you what you should do, and listen to them. Now let's push that to one side and go back to 1922 again. This is my take on it. In 1922, they changed none of the English colonial institutions. They kept the Trinity College by Henry VIII. They kept the four courts. They kept the land rights owning. They kept the political systems. They kept the Royal College of Surgeons. And all of these royal colleges of this, that and the other were all English. And in 1922, if you can go to their website, look up their Ministry of, that office, Home Office. They used to call it Home Office, but the Department of Justice. Look that up and look at the history. And they'd say in the first 5 years, we also called it the Home Office. In actual fact, we kept all of the English administration and transferred them onto an Irish state. So my point would be is that because most of these people came from an English background anyway, Fitzgerald and so on and so forth, were Old English, they kept the colonial systems running in 1922. So when they went to attack travellers, it wasn't a new thing necessarily. It was a continuation of breaking down the Celtic culture, the clans, the Irish people. That's my impression.
And I wouldn't necessarily disagree or agree with everything you said. I would agree that there was a continuity and a continuation of pre-1921, 22. And it was that continuation in relation to the colonisation process that had been taking place in the previous 400 or 500 years.
Well, let me interrupt with this one just to keep you on roll, right?
Okay.
At the beginning stages of the colonisation of Ireland, it was called the Settlement of Ireland.
Of course, yeah.
Right? In 1922, when independence was coming about, pre-1922, David Lloyd George, the Prime Minister at the time, it was about the settlement of Dublin. So they needed to get Dublin in order to continuation of their systems. In 1963, what was it about travellers? The settlement of travellers.
Yes.
So me, it's a kind of conscious colonial mentality that never stopped. But go on.
Absolutely. And I would agree that colonialism mindset never really stopped or ended for travellers in 1921, 22. It just became the assimilationist absorption policies that was to grow. But just in terms of what you're saying there about, remember Ireland in 1921, 22 was Dominion status. it didn't necessarily become a republic until 1949.
That's right.
That's my dates, if I have my dates right on that.
I was going to say 47, 48, but go on. I could be on it.
Just in terms of that, what you're saying there about the institutions of the state post 1921, I mean, they were never going to really, they were never going to really throw off the yoke of the institutions that had been created in the previous number of centuries and so forth. And it would be kind of naive of us to think that post 1921 that we were going to go back to an old Gaelic chieftain setup in Ireland. I don't think that was ever going to happen. But what I find interesting, Bernie, in relation to the treatment of travellers from the get-go and the othering process, that one could argue that it was everyone pre-1921 was being tarnished with the same brush because of the colonial powers.
That's right?
Yeah. And then we come to the free state or the dominion status, and one could argue that now that we were our own masters, that all were going to be treated fair and equitably, and all were going to be given a slice of the Irish pie as such. They made it categorically clear in the very, as I said, in the very early days, weeks and months of the new state, and indeed for this last 100 years, that travellers were never going to be, or tinker travellers, or whatever term you want to use, Minker, Pavi, there's others that we could use as well, but they made it categorically clear that they were never going to include travellers in that social contract. And the reason why I keep emphasising the social contract, the premise of a social contract is having the option to opt out oneself. There's no such thing as having the option of opting in. You're supposed to be, the social contract is the idea that the state has a social contract with its citizenship, and that all is included in that, and their endeavours to create a fair and equitable and just society is that you're automatically, once born a citizen, you are going to be part and parcel of that social contract. But if you look at some of the language that grew post 1921, post 1941, post 1963, that you talk about with the Commission on Itinerancy, and the language in that is extraordinary.
That's right. 1983 report also, which is even more diabolical. And
then at an individual level, you hear local representatives, you hear media representatives, presenters. I won't name any, but we know some people have built and really built their careers on the back of anti-traveller rhetoric, whether at a local level or at a national level.
Oh, quite a few of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And media also.
Well, that's the point I'm making.
Or political media, sorry.
Yeah, but they've also, Bernie, just on that point, there's always this equating responsibility with rights when it comes to travellers. We'll treat you with rights, we'll give you those rights once you act in a responsible manner.
Yeah.
That same kind of argument is never designated onto the white, settled, sedentary majority population. But when it comes to travellers, we have to, for us to participate in this society, we have to excel. We have to excel. We have to be better than better, whiter than white. And we have to achieve almost extraordinary levels of I
think we already have.
Well, if you just bear with me on that.
I know what you're saying. When it comes to a kind of equal opportunities for everybody, if the settled people are in front. If you want to you got to run 3 times faster just to be
absolutely
to keep on track.
The expectation that's placed on us as a people is extraordinary. Now, if you compare and contrast what the state set about post 1921. At the moment, the argument is, and we hear it all the time, Bord Fáilte, all of the big bodies that represent and promote Ireland, or particularly the 26 counties at an international level, will talk about the wonderfully educated population of Ireland, the sophistication of our society and so forth. And none of that isn't actually not true. There's a lot of it that is true.
Well, I think, look, if we call it what it is, it's a subculture of English culture.
But I want to paint.
I know you don't want to.
No, I'm not disputing what you're saying. I want to make this point.
But I don't want to.
This is an important point, Bernie. For me, it's an important point. You've asked me on for a podcast, and I'm going to do it. And I want to make this point.
Go for a bit.
The state wrapped its arms around white settled sedentary population from the get-go. It literally, from the very get-go, it excluded, it alienated, it refused to acknowledge traveller, thinker, identity and its place in the Irish context. And they set about that process of assimilation and absorption and cultural denial, cultural erosion and so forth. We now are in the 21st century, coming to the 100th anniversary. You talked about the stats earlier on. You talked about the social determinants of travellers, the suicide rate, the mental health issues,
unemployment. It's just endless. Can you name a stat where it's actually good? I can't think of one stat that's actually good.
No, there isn't. And this is the point I'm making to you, is that the expectation that's placed on us to be good citizens and to partake in a society that for that 100 years has completely and utterly attempted to deny us the right to almost exist is extraordinary.
I go as far as to call it, just for the mild, a psychological genocide of a people, pushing them to the ends, depriving them of equality, rights, services, you name it. Yeah. Ridiculed in the media, ridiculed by the churches, ridiculed by politicians, endless, non-stop.
Yes.
My question will always be, and we'll get there eventually, is we've always had to identify who we were, almost on the spot. Bit like Germany, Hitler. Who are you? Tell us about your culture, where you came from, your people, your land, your language. And you're struggling because you're like, we grew up in trauma. The reason the traveller hasn't grown up in trauma, for generation after generation, we can go back long time, but we take from the famine onwards. You're talking about diseases, conflicts, violence, starvation, never talked about, never addressed. We're constantly to identify ourselves. So the question, very simple question I have for settled people is, who the fuck are you? Where did you come from? Where did your systems and language and customs come from? And when you figure that out, then you know who we are.
Yeah, I mean, you could go down, you could. And I understand, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you either, Bernie, on your point. I mean, that is true. I mean, one thing that's always been asked or requested of travellers is the origin question. Who are you? Where and how?
We're in a stage where we're barely able to stand up at the moment. Go on.
That question. Well, I would argue to some extent, if we are to take a looking in rather than a looking out approach, I would argue, and I'm sure you might agree or disagree with me, that if you take, say, the collapse of the old Gaelic chieftains post 1609 and all of that period.
Can we just intervene there 1 second? When you say post Celtic society chieftain,
Gaelic.
Can we just, and you can, how many travellers do you know? Well, quite a few.
Oh, I do, yes.
Different surnames, we call different clans. Yeah. Has any of them, when you were growing up, had not had a king and a queen and warriors to fight?
I know, but
I'm saying we're still in there. I'll never also just say the Celtic culture is not a genetic race of people. It never was. It's just a mentality culture.
I know, and it is. You're absolutely right. But the point I'm making to you is that in that 400 years since the collapse of the Gaelic lordships, particularly in the northern part of Ireland, Irish society as a whole has been altered. I mean, the language, if you take the Gaelic tongue, or the Irish tongue itself has been altered as well. But if you take, say, the makeup of travellers, Bernie, the patriarchal, I mean, we know that society in the entire world is patriarchal, but if you take that patriarchal, if you take family orientated, if you take extended family orientated, if you take interfamily connections and so forth, the transient nomadic lifestyle, whether it was forced on one or it was pre life in existence.
It can also be a combination of both.
Yeah, it can be a combination of both, and that's been acknowledged by quite a lot of much more learned people than I'll ever be. But if you take us as that grouping and just remove us for a moment and say, well, actually, why are we asking this group where they came from and their origin?
I'm sick of it.
I know, I am too. And flip that and say, well, actually, why not? If we look at, say, the 1600s, going right back to 1169 when the arrival of Strongbow at the behest of Dermot MacMurrough.
That's right.
And when they arrived, and then 1172, I think. When
I wonder did he ever
Henry
regret it?
Well, I'm sure he did, but by then it was too late. But if you look at, say, the makeup of Irish in this last 1,000 years, from that period of time, I mean, we have been in a continuous, almost upheaval, continuous conflict in some form or another. I mean, you know, it is a nation of trauma in itself in the round. And then there's us, this group that for some reason or another we have managed to survive partition in 21 and the formation of the Irish state. We managed to survive the various different, the Fenian uprising of 1868, 67. The 1847.
I say we survived everything.
Yeah, the 1798 rebellion, the Cromwellian period of destruction and devastation, the famines, the two famines. Remember, there was a famine 100 years prior to the 1845 famine, which killed a huge amount
That's right.
as well.
And there was at least 4 genocides in around that time.
In that period of time. And then right back during the Celtic or the Gaelic lordships, and then right back to what was called the Gaelic revivalists, or in
middle class
in
Protestants. I remember them.
Post the conquest, about 150 years after the conquest, the initial conquest with the Anglo-Normans. So we as a people, tinker travellers, or whatever the term we want to use, for some godforsaken reason, have managed to continually maintain some kind of linkage, I would say.
Yeah.
And I've studied history, and I see it as an important part of who we are. But that question you started off with, Bernie, and I know it's a big one. I think we need more time on all of this conversation anyways. But that question is who, where, how did we come about?
Constantly.
It is a question that it's of no value. It's of no. We are here. We have been here.
And we go back further. We're all genetically connected. We all came from Africa. So you don't go away.
Yeah.
I mean, how far do you want to go back?
So, but the question really should be is, why is it that we are living with all of the stats in terms of the social determinants, the mental health, the suicide rate of 6 to 1?
Well, the same question again, and for people listening, people are wondering why we keep going on about history. As I said this a million times before, for settled people, history is recorded in the books, times, events, places, and it goes in a line backwards.
Yeah, well,
but we're saying that our history actually lives with us. We are part of that history.
I would agree, yeah.
We embraced in the culture the best we could. We survived, and you were talking about survival. We kept the traveller language, which is centuries old in itself.
Yes.
So that kept us, remember we talked about the frequency and we know each other, that kept us lined through who we were through the centuries. I lost my trail of thought, but go on.
No, I mean, just in terms of the language, the question the point you're making there about the language, in terms of it. If you take our language, gammon, cant, or shelta, depending on what term you want to use, it's an oral language. And what's extraordinary about it is just a number of theories, and one of the more ridiculous theories that I've always found extraordinary is that that gammon is an inverted form of Irish. Now, hear me out, just allow me the moment.
Yeah, I've heard this one.
Yeah, right, so
I think if it's true, right, it actually shows the intelligence. I'll tell you why. Let me go. I know. Go on. Go ahead.
No, I need you to.
Go for it.
Again, you asked me on. So
I know, but I told you it's on a normal podcast. I get fair excited at times. Go on.
No, you do. But if we take that idea, and this is well-known academics have argued, it's in inverted form. So what that means is they take an Irish word and it's then written down.
Yeah.
And then what they do is they alter it. So they invert it. They take the first letter and replace it with the last letter and so forth and so forth. Now that's just a simplified...
but I like that.
But bear with me. I find that extraordinary, and I find it quite dismissive almost to the sense, because what what they're saying really is that what we've done is we've taken Gaelic, the Irish tongue, and we've taken words and we've altered them and created almost an inverted kind of secret language. But if we've done that, if we managed to do that, now remember that this was supposed to happen, one of the theories being that we are dropouts from the famine and so forth.
Yeah.
Failed settled people. And if we manage to do that in that 140 years to the present, 160 years now to the present day, or give or take, Actually, it's a bit more. Obviously, I get my times a little bit. It's 2021.
Ended around 1747 or
But
something.
if that's the case, if that is what
1847,
we've
sorry.
done and managed to achieve that in that period of time, that's an extraordinary achievement in itself,
Yeah.
which is worth investigating
Of course.
and researching and looking at, because you've taken a people who are by and large illiterate, even in the present day with our educational
That's right.
disadvantage, and they were able to take a language, create a language
Yeah.
in that period of time, which is completely ridiculous to believe that. The other one is this: is that the
Well, can I just go on that one first, all right?
Okay.
And you follow on the next one. This is my take on it, is that the language was first recorded almost 500 years ago, all right? That's perfectly fine. When the Normans came, they learned the Irish language. Who has 50% of the island at the moment? The Normans. When the English came, what did they do? They started learning the Irish. Why did they start learning the Irish? Because it was easier to track down the clans and separate them from the Irish society. So if we turn the language around backwards,
Yes.
it's because either the Normans or the English couldn't tell the difference. And we knew then they couldn't be as Irish as they said they were.
Well, if that's the case,
It's struck a genius, I
but
think.
I want to finish with this at this point is because
You have to make tracks, have you?
yeah, and maybe we can do more
We're
of
going to
this.
come back more to this after.
But can I just make this point to you,
Yeah, of course.
Bernie, on your podcast, is that language is an integral part of a people's identity. Language is, there's a saying, people without a language are orphans, right? And I would argue that if you take our language...
What about people with sign language?
Yes, but just bear with me for a minute, Bernie, and I know you're there has been no investment in the protection, preservation, or the promotion of Gammon, Tinker language, traveller language. No state investment. Forget about it being a tongue or a language of ourselves. It is the third language of the Irish people. If you take Gaelic, the Irish tongue, the English tongue, and Ulster Scots, which is now being
That's right,
promoted
yeah.
and supported in the northern portion of this
Which is
island.
brilliant. I think it's, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yet not one iota has been invested into the preservation, protection, promotion of the Gammon
Now,
language.
between two of us, I'll let you go because you have to go. But before you go, right, and people are wondering, why are we still talking about all this stuff? And again, just a quick recap. Let's start from here. Let's start from right this present moment. Our health statistics, what we spoke about. Go back the decades. No changes. Sometimes it's worse. Let's go back to centuries. It's the same thing. Let's go back when the invasion started and we work away right up to this moment where we came to the exact same spear of line. We carried language, coded language, secret language. Why wouldn't it be coded in secret when there was bounties put on our heads, get our heads chopped off? So of course we had to survive. But all of that stuff, you're right, it's been not...
But it needs
Yeah.
more discourse, more conversation,
A lot more, my friend.
investigation. And we need to have more of this kind of open conversation along with, and I would suggest, Bernie, we need to have the academics involved from Trinity, from Maynooth, from NU.
You know what I did last year? I put a tweet out. I said I challenged all the Queen's colleges, Trinity College, Maynooth College. I said, I'm here. Send your finest.
And
They haven't got back to me
well,
yet.
maybe you
I'll try something else. Yeah,
finish with
go
that.
on. Go, you
Maybe-
finish up.
Maybe instead of being so confrontational,
Oh, no, if you...
maybe have it more of an invite to have that discourse and that conversation.
Yeah, but I wasn't sure about anything. That's why I was lashing out.
Well, I'm saying to you, look. Anyways, Bernie, thanks for. I thank you very much for
Patrick, Nevin, thank you very much for coming in, all right? And we're going to do many more of these talks from one thing to another. People, enjoy your day and thank you very much for tuning in. Bye-bye.